Hi everyone, Miss Hart here. In the last lecture we discussed how Britain took the path of reform in the first half of the 19th century. Today we're going to look at Russia and discuss how they respond to all the isms in the 19th century. But before we do that, I want you to pause this video and go and get your notebook if you don't have it in front of you so you can take some notes. Otherwise, we're going to get started. So as opposed to Britain in the early 19th century, Russia has an autocratic government that's led by a czar, who is essentially an absolute monarch. And the czar is going to brutally repress kind of like any challenges to his authority and any attempts at reform. In 1829, Tsar Nicholas was set to take over after the death of Alexander I. Remember, that was the czar who resisted Napoleon's invasion of France, if you recall. However, there were a lot of questions as to Nicholas's legitimacy with many of the upper classes, mostly those from military backgrounds, who preferred Alexander's brother Constantine instead. These dissidents staged an uprising, convincing some of the troops in St. Petersburg to refuse to take a loyalty oath to Nicholas I and to demand the ascension of Constantine instead. The rebellion, however, was poorly organized and easily suppressed. Those who did not flee were first tried, then executed or banished to Siberia. The uprising was significant because it's the first open breach between the government and the reformist parts of the Russian nobility, which is subsequently going to widen through the 19th century, and ultimately we know that some of these issues are going to lead to revolution in the early 20th century. Still, with the failure of kind of the December 1825 revolution, Russia's autocracy would continue for the remainder of period 3, despite some brief spurts of reform, like the abolition of serfdom in 1861. Yes, Russia still has serfs. It's Alexander II, Nicholas's successor, who actually frees the serfs in 1861, although this reform was pretty half-hearted, as the serfs still needed to pay the landowners for their land, and most were not in a position to do so. But really, once again, the Tsar had to kind of compromise with the upper classes, who he kind of really depended on to kind of support his rule of Russia. So really, by the 1820s, most Russians believed serfdom had to end, but Tsar Nicholas was really reluctant to do so. As I mentioned, freeing the serfs would really anger the upper class landowners, and all these Russian czars need the upper classes to support them and to stay in power. Most of Nicholas's rule was focused on maintaining his control of the Russian Empire and really trying to expand his power to prove that Russia was on par with the other great powers. Russia seems to always be doing this, right? Russia's always, since Peter the Great, Catherine the Great and now Nicholas II, they're always, or Nicholas I rather, always out to like prove that they're just as powerful as the rest of these other Western European empires like France or Britain or Austria or Prussia. Basically, there's two main things I want you to really remember about Russia in the first half of the 19th century. The first is Tsar Nicholas's policy of autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationalism, and the second is the Crimean War. The first, autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationalism, was the motto of Tsar Nicholas's government and had a huge influence on not only his period of Russian rule, but future czars. Under this kind of guiding principle, the government used their authority to implement Russification policies in schools, in non-Russian areas of the empire, to pressure non-Orthodox Christian groups to convert, and to really repress the nationalistic ambitions of the non-Russian nationality groups that were in the minority in the Russian Empire. You know, this principle is also going to lead to the Russian government supporting the efforts of other Slavic people, because the Russians are Slavic people, to achieve national autonomy or self-rule, their own country, basically. This is going to contribute to the rivalry between Russia and Austria over the Slavic people living in Eastern Europe in the Austrian Empire, and definitely is going to play a role in the future in the outbreak of World War I. The second thing I'd like to focus in on is the Crimean War, which was a conflict between the Russian and Ottoman empires, fought primarily in the Crimean Peninsula. You can see the Crimean Peninsula circled here on the map. It's kind of this peninsula jutting out into the Black Sea. And we know from other discussions earlier in the course how important the Black Sea was. The Crimean Peninsula was very important strategically. Russia wanted to control both the Balkan Peninsula, remember all those Slavic people living there, and the Black Sea. To prevent Russian expansion, Britain and France sent troops to support the Ottoman Empire. Not because they loved the Ottoman Empire, but because they didn't want to see a stronger Russia. So they were really supporting the Ottomans, who are at this point kind of considered the sick man of Europe and a declining empire. And they really just wanted to check the Russian kind of expansion and to check Russia's power. Austria and Prussia remained neutral in this conflict. This really destroys the concert of Europe and the balance of power established by the Congress of Vienna. The Crimean War was also managed very poorly on both sides. Most of the deaths during the war were due to disease. When news of the deplorable conditions at the front line reaches like the homeland in Britain, nurses like Florence Nightingale flocked to the Crimea to treat the wounded. Florence Nightingale is a significant figure in history because she both revolutionized the treatment of wounded soldiers in battlefield medicine. She also, very importantly, provides an inspiration to British women who saw her work outside of the home and began to follow suit, kind of breaking those gender roles that were firmly established by the cult of domesticity that was so popular in the 19th century Victorian era in Great Britain. So the Crimean War, even though we don't spend a lot of time on it, the Crimean War is really important. It contributes to really a poor relationship that's developing slowly between Austria and Russia. Austria was neutral at first, but Austria had lost the support of Russia in Central European affairs when it eventually sides with Great Britain and France against Russia in the Crimean War. This is really what kind of ended the Crimean War, Austria kind of beginning to side with Great Britain and France. And this dependence on Britain and France ultimately weakens Austria and eventually leads to the unification of Germany and Italy, which is a discussion for another day. So all in all, try to remember that Russia in the 19th century was interested in expanding their power, but really we can see because of nationalism and other problems with their government, they're having a very difficult time doing so. Once again, I'll see you in class tomorrow, and make sure you bring with me any questions that you have for this lecture. Thanks. Have a good one. See you tomorrow.